Whether you get your lumber rough sawn or already dimensioned, eventually you're going to have to deal with cup, twist, or bow, and I'm going to show you how to deal with all three imperfections with hand planes right now. Hello, my name is Jeffrey Kaiser and welcome to my channel, Built to Last. I've been a part-time furniture maker for about 35 years, and my goal is to help you improve your woodworking through the use of time-tested joinery methods and construction techniques that take into consideration seasonal wood movement so you can build furniture that is truly built to last. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe, click the notification bell, and don't forget to enable notifications on your mobile device so you don't miss any of my new videos. If you're interested in purchasing any of the tools I demonstrate, I will include affiliate links in the video description. Question of the day. What are your planing challenges? Please answer in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. There are a variety of reasons why someone may opt to dimension lumber with hand planes. First, if we look at it from a budgetary perspective, even if we invest in high-end quality hand tools, it's often much cheaper than what it would cost to purchase the machinery to do the same task. Typically, that's going to mean a joiner, a planer, and a table saw. Then there's the issue of what size planer do we have? Once we jump above 6-inch, cost of a joiner can become very cost prohibitive. I often work with boards much wider than my 6-inch joiner can accommodate. In that case, I'll joint one face flat with hand planes, take it to my thickness planer to get 2 parallel faces, and then I'll finish the milling process with my joiner and planer. For me, if I'm working on my own, I generally just use a completely hand tool process because I just enjoy the quiet solitude and not having to deal with airborne dust or the noise associated with machinery. We can also use hand planing to touch up dimensional lumber that's developed cup, twist, or bow after dimensioning. The board that I'm planing today is destined to become part of a Dutch tool chest I'm building to transport my tools to and from the local historical society where I volunteer as a woodwright in their 18th century wheelwright shop. This board will be one of the back boards, so it will receive tongue and groove joinery, but before we can cut that joinery, we need to process the board so that it's free of cup, twist, and bow. These are the 3 maladies that introduce themselves to boards as they dry. So, to describe those, cup is a curving of the board across its width, and it occurs towards the bark side of the tree. So the growth rings are arched upward, and as the board dries, the growth rings attempt to straighten themselves out, introducing cup. Bow occurs lengthwise in the board, and fortunately this one is relatively free of bow, so we don't have to deal with that, but it does have twist. If we turn the board over, we can see that these are our 2 high corners, the way the board rocks. We can also read twist and see our degree of twist using what are called winding sticks. These are typically about 24 inches long, and they magnify the twist in the board. And I can see, looking down the length of the board, about half the width of a winding stick registers as twist. And the way these work is they magnify the twist in the board. So these are about 3.5 times the width of the board, so it helps us greatly identify the twist. There are 3 classes of plane that we use when processing lumber. The first is the fore plane. That's F-O-R-E, a contraction of before, as this is the first plane that touches the board before any others. So here I'm using a Bailey number 5. The characteristics of a fore plane include a medium length sole, an open mouth, and a deep set cambered iron. Now, when talking about set, we're referring to the projection of the iron beneath the sole of the plane. In this configuration, a fore plane used typically cross grain will take an aggressive cut and quickly remove cup, twist, and bow, getting us to a generally flat initial face on the board. Also, because this plane cuts so aggressively, it can quickly thickness a board. So you could think of this as the thickness planer of the hand tool world. Once we have a generally flat surface, we can turn to the joiner plane. This happens to be a Bailey 8C, C indicating a corrugated sole. The corrugation minimizes friction when using longer planes like this. Characteristics of a joiner plane include a long sole, a closed mouth, and a straight iron. We can use this plane to get us to a very flat, true surface. Then we move on to the third class of plane, which is a smoothing plane. This is a Bailey 4.5. It's much shorter. So this smoothing plane has a short sole, a narrow mouth, and a close set iron. This plane can produce a finish ready or near finish ready surface. Before we start planing, we need to consider grain direction. And to help illustrate this, I have a bundle of straws to represent enlarged wood fibers. And so what we want to do when we're planing is we want to plane into rising grain so we cleanly sever the fibers. If we plane against the grain or into the grain, we'll lift the fibers, producing tear out. To determine grain direction in the board, we can do that through feel or sight. If I drag my hand from right to left, the board feels slightly smoother than if I drag it from left to right, where the tips of the wood fibers dig into my fingertips. Also, from the side of the board, you may see that there's rising grain along the edge, so we know that we want to plane with the grain. In order to plane, we first need to have a way to secure our board to the bench. I'm using some brass Veritas bench pups. These are just located in 3/4 inch holes that I bored down the length of my bench, and then one in my rolling block or sliding block tail vise here. I've also heard mention of this called a wagon vise. I've not heard that before, but just saw that recently. When I built my bench, this was just something I came up with on my own. But what this does, it secures the board to the bench so it doesn't move. And as I did using the winding sticks, I'm going to start planing on the concave side of the board. What this will do is it will give me 2 points of reference for my foreplane. And what a plane does, it takes high spots down to low spots. So it'll ride these high spots, bringing the board down to a state of flatness. And so we know from using our winding sticks, we have our high points here and here. So we'll give them a little bit extra attention and then use the foreplane across the entire length of the board to bring it into a state of general flatness. So I'll check the projection or the set of my iron. Again, this is a Bailey number 5. Bailey marketed this, or Stanley marketed this as a jack plane, and there's number 6 as a foreplane. Because I do some teaching at our local historical society and the weight of my tools is a consideration, this is what I use there, and this plane is also still in manufacture, so for demonstration purposes, if you're interested in purchasing one of these new, you can do so. The number 6 you can probably find on the antique market, either eBay or swap meets, but this is still in production, so I'm demonstrating this today. So I will start on these known high spots, and when I'm planing, I'm keeping the weight going into this cut starting. I'm going toe, the majority of the pressure is on the toe of the plane. On this end of the board, the majority of the downward pressure is on the heel of the plane. And the front knob I'm using to propel the plane through the board. Now, notice the type of chip we get from this plane. It's heavier in the middle and feathers off to nothing on the edges. Now, what you can get on the far edge as you're working, you can get what's called spelch, where this tear out. And so we can just run a quick run along the board. It takes a heavy cut, but it removes the possibility of spelching or tear out on the far side. So I'm going to work on the ends first. It could be a little tighter. This board also is angled, so that's why it's wanting to pull in that direction. So before I go any further, I'm going to start looking at the board with my winding sticks again. We've taken quite a bit of twist out of the board already. With properly tuned planes, this work can go fairly fast. We need to be careful that we don't introduce twist in the opposite direction. It's easy to overdo it. And I'm already to a state of no wind on either end. Now I can just work back and forth to remove the cup. So I've removed the twist. Now my goal is to remove cup. So I'm almost there already. We can see we only have a little bit through the middle here of low spots with the original rough-sawn surface. Check the board. We had minimal bow. Just make sure that we're not introducing any other deficiencies lengthwise. Okay. No twist there. I like to check about every foot just to make sure. And that looks good. So, if you were to be doing a hybrid hand tool and machine milling process, this is flat, so you could take this to your thickness planer and go ahead and start your process from there. So if you had a joiner that was not wide enough to accommodate your board, you could use your foreplane, get the board to a relative state of flatness. Now it is ready. You could take it to your thickness planer and continue working. Since we're going to be continuing with the hand tool process, I'm going to go ahead and go to the jointer now to get the board flat. So what this will do, this long bed of this Bailey number 8, it'll ride the high spots and sever the tops of the hills so that the plane goes down to the valleys. Because we have that scalloped edge, right now it's taking off those hilltops. So you can hear that skipping as the iron is severing the hilltops across the length of the board. Let's take a deeper cut with each pass. And note my planing stance. I'm right-handed, so I'm leading with my left foot, and I'm pushing with my right leg. Your thighs are the largest muscle group in your body, so you want to use that to propel the plane through the wood. Now the shavings are getting longer, more consistent. So, again, a word about planing technique. We're going to start with the toe. That's the area of the plane before the iron. We're going to start with the toe on the board, the iron off the board. Pressing down, all our pressure is on the toe, and we're just using the rear tote to push the plane through the wood. As we get to the center of the board, we're pressing down evenly, even pressure between the knob and the rear tote. And then as we exit the cut, the knob or the toe of the plane is just going to be guiding, and the force is going to be forward and down on the heel, the area behind the mouth. Now, as I'm cutting, I can see we're a little low here, so we need to bring this down so that the entire board is jointed. Also, I mentioned earlier how the corrugated sole helps reduce friction. We can also reduce friction by using a little wax. I'll rub this wax on the sole, and that'll help ease the plane across the surface, so that all of our force is going into cutting rather than fighting the friction on the sole. Now notice we have a different shape shaving than what we were getting with the curved iron, or the cambered iron of the foreplane. Now what I've done here is I'm taking a little heavier cut. So I use the adjustment knob To increase the set on the iron, take a little heavier cut. I want to cut slightly more aggressive because I am doing a little bit of thicknessing here due to the amount of wood I took off on this end during using the foreplane. Due to the length of this board, I'm having to take a bit of a step to get from one end to the other. Okay, that feels pretty good. I'm going to take a look at my winding sticks again. Want to make sure that our shavings are not lifting and giving us a false reading. So that's looking good. So we started with our coarsest tool, our foreplane, and removed our cup, twist, and bow. Then we went to a slightly more refined tool, the joiner, and now we have a flat surface, but it's not down to a finish-ready surface. We do that with our third plane, the smoothing plane. We want to start with no cut and then move up to a slightly stronger cut as we go. There's still going to be some slight undulations in the surface, but these will quickly be taken care of by the smoothing plane. Using the lateral adjuster for a slight correction. And the goal is to take a shaving that's coming straight up out of the mouth. This is still slightly heavy, so I'll back off the iron a little bit. You notice these shavings are getting wider, more consistent. They could still be a little bit lighter set. Be careful as I'm coming off. You may have noticed I skipped off and tapped the heel of the plane on the board. We don't want to be doing that because we can change our board. Or correction, change the setting on our iron. So I'm taking overlapping cuts as I work my way across the board. And I'm getting these nice, feathery shavings. And again, I'm starting with the toe down on the board, the iron off the board, all the downward pressure is at the toe going into the cut. It evens out in the length of the cut, and then it's all the pressure is coming, all the downward pressure is on the heel. And we're getting these nice, thin, feathery shavings. Now, when we have a smooth board, I'll probably refine this a little bit more later, but you should be able to see some of the shimmer in this surface of this board that we have now that started a few minutes ago as a rough-sawn surface. So we have our face mark indicating our true face, and that will point to our true edge, which we will mark by an intersecting caret. And by having these two marks, if either of them gets removed, by having them join, we know exactly which is our true face and our true edge so that we can replace that mark if we accidentally remove it later. So now I have my board in my shoulder vise with my true face in this direction as the grain, as I'm trying to read it visually and through touch, appears to be rising grain going right to left, but we'll see once we get the plane on it. So first we want to look for how square we are. The goal of this procedure is to have the true edge square to the true face. So we're generally square, except for on this end, it's kind of leaning this way a little bit. So it's leaning away from me, and checking for any bow. Got a little bit of bow in the middle. I'm rather high on this end, and this grain looks like it may go up on this end and up on this end. We'll see how the joiner and the foreplane tackle it. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to take a shallower cut. I'm going to reduce the set on my foreplane. So I have it taking a very shallow cut here as foreplanes go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch the iron, or pinch the toe, so that the iron is going to engage heavier on this side, out to nothing on this side, and try to square this portion of the board up. Going to increase my set a little bit. And by pinching the toe of the plane, what this does, my finger acts as an ad hoc fence. So the plane stays oriented. So it's cutting primarily on this side. So the side nearest me. And still take down a little bit. I only had a little bit to go. I don't want to go too far. Now I've got a little bit of hump in the middle, right here on the end. So again, I'm going to pinch the toe, but more to the right side. So what I want is for this knob, I'll use the brass screw as a center line. I want that to go down the middle of the board to flatten out the middle, to remove that hump. And that may have done it just that. Yep. So I'm high here and I haven't touched anything here, so I know I'm still high. However, I'm square across the edge. I'm square to the true face. So I'm going to engage my joiner plane now. I'll take the joiner plane and work on the two ends. Now, I'm not going to be taking anything in the middle because this 24-inch sole isn't going to be able to reach the center of the board as it is. So right now, I'm just worried about taking a cut on either end, and I'll take progressively longer cuts until I can take a full-length shaving. And just like I talked about with the smoothing plane, I want that shaving to come straight up. If it curls to either side, that's an indication that my iron is not square to the sole. So even though the grain appears to be going uphill, or that I'm not going into rising grain, it does appear that this iron is sharp enough that it doesn't matter. It's cutting fine against the grain, or what appears to be a cut against the grain on the leading edge. So that looks good. I'm square and appear to be straight, and when I check it with my known good straight edge, I'm good the entire length. So that is our true edge, and I can mark that, as I mentioned, with a caret. So this intersection lets us know we have a true face and a true edge. If either of these marks get removed, as I mentioned, we can always restore the mark by looking at the mark on the opposite side, whether that's the face or the edge. Now we can move on to marking our second edge parallel to the first. So my camera stopped recording, so I'm going to retrace what I did here to show you how I got this line. We have a true face and a true edge. And what I did was I took my panel gauge. This is just a large marking gauge. It's a pin type gauge with a brass faced fence. So this brass face acts as a wear plate so that it doesn't, the friction along the board doesn't wear the edge or the fence of the rosewood body. So the way this works is we place it on the true edge, and we can scribe a line that is parallel to the true edge, so we have two edges that are in parallel with one another. So what I did was I first found the narrowest part of the board, and then I scribed the line. And I first started shallow so that the pin does not try to follow the grain. And then I take progressively heavier cuts, and it scribes a deep, well-defined scribe line. So now I can take the board back to my shoulder vise and plane the second edge parallel to the true edge. So I have my board with a true face and a true edge with a line scribed parallel to our true edge. Now, I have the scribe line facing you, so in order to plane with the grain running left to right and being right-handed, I'm going to have to do a reverse grip on my plane and pull the plane towards me so that you can see the stock removal. This is a perfectly acceptable approach. What I'm going to do is bring the foreplane still with a fairly light set. I'll start out and then we'll get down and check it for square when we're down to the line. Almost to the line there. Still got a high spot here. A little bit more here. So I'm checking. Again, I'm favoring the viewer side of the board towards the true face so that the cambered iron in the foreplane can bring the edge into square. Okay, I'm not seeing any light there. That's looking good. So I'm square along the entire edge. Go to my known good straight edge. And I've got a little bit of a high spot right here in the middle. So I'm just working the center of the board right now. I have a very light set on my iron. So I don't want to be too aggressive. And these feathery shavings, they're coming right straight up the middle. They're not deflecting to either side. So I know my iron is square to the sole. Okay, I've got a noticeable high spot right here in the middle that's acting as a pivot point. And right here is where we have the remnants of a knot that may be the beginning of a branch, possibly, that may be causing maybe a little bit of resistance so it didn't plane as much, possibly. Okay, that's feeling good. Looks good, no light passing through. I'm going to check again, make sure I did not reintroduce any out of square, so I'm good. I've got no light passing under the beam of my square, and the known good straight edge is set flat against the surface. So now I've got a true face, a true edge, and a parallel edge. So now I can scribe a line all the way around the board, and what I'm looking for is 3/4 of an inch. So I'm setting my marking gauge, and I've set that to 3/4 of an inch. And so what I can do is register the gauge or the guide on my marking gauge on the true face and scribe a line all the way around my board. I'm getting just to 3/4 of an inch right here, trailing off. Now, even though my ends aren't square to the board, I can still mark my thickness. Again, I'm registering off the true face, so I have a known thickness that I'm setting. So now I have my thickness scribed all the way around my board. So now I can plane to that mark, and I'll have a 4-square board. So now we're ready to plane our second face. I've taken a fine point pencil and reinforced the scribe line so that hopefully you can see it better. And this is going to be our convex side. So had we not started with our convex side, our plane would have just kind of rolled over the hill rather than lowering the high points down to the low points. So we can take a different approach with this face, and I'll run lengthwise with the grain. I'll start off by adding a little bit of wax to the sole and start taking down this ridge. Take a little bit heavier cut. This is an aggressive cut we need here. We don't need to be bashful about taking down the wood. Notice how I'm pushing off with my rear leg, my right leg. By using our largest muscle group in our body, our legs, we can save strength in our arms. So we're working entirely to the line. This corner here is already to our thickness. We don't want to touch that any more than we have to. This corner we have about a 16th here. We're already almost to the line here. On this back side, we probably have an 1/8 of an inch or greater. Again, we can come back and work cross grain. Periodically check the overall field. Make sure I'm not introducing any high or low spots in the length. And then I'll check it diagonally as well. I just don't want to introduce any bow. I can always take down high spots, and I'm a tad high just in the middle, but not by much. We're going to be going to the joiner plane next. So this work is just as much by feel as it is by sight. This board's feeling generally flat. I've got a little bit lower spot here, or maybe a ridge we want to call it, tapering off right here, about an inch or so in from the edge of the board. A little bit of a high spot. Got a little bit of tear out here right with this knot. That won't be a problem. We have more refined planes. It'll take care of that. And in the end, this is going to be the back of a tool chest, and where this dark knot and this streaking occurred, I'll probably put that towards the inside where even I will rarely see it. If you look at the back of antique furniture, you may see the scalloped edge on non-show faces, such as the back of a cabinet or underside of a table. So if it wasn't a show face, it wouldn't have been touched any more than just the thicknessing. At about a 1/16 of an inch through here, this is about our highest point in the perimeter. Here we have another knot, so a little bit more tear out. If I back off my iron a little bit, reduce the set, I may clean that up a little or not. So I'm taking somewhat of a skew cut here so that as I enter the board from the side, I've got the toe registered against a higher area on the board so I can take down and bring this outside edge that is a little bit of a low spot. So I'm not engaging the iron, the iron is not engaging the wood immediately upon entering the board or passing over the board. It may come in, leave the edge, and then engage the wood. Maybe, depending on the rise here, I feel it's about 1/2 inch in here, maybe 3/4 here, where we have a little bit of a low spot. So I don't want to take off too much. I'm trying to level the board at this point. Increase the set here just a little bit. It's not cutting quite as aggressively as I'd like at this point. I'll try that reverse grip here a little bit. Reduce the set a little bit. That's looking pretty good. Just clean this a little more. So that's looking good. Now we can go to our joiner plane. Increase my set a little bit. And back off that now that I'm cutting a little bit deeper. I'm taking a little bit of a shearing cut. So that feels pretty good that quickly. So now we can do a final touch-up with the smoothing plane. So the smoothing plane will leave a finish ready or nearly finish ready surface. I like to tell people that I'll take severed fibers over a braided any day. I haven't used sandpaper since I started using planes and scrapers more than 2 decades ago. We'll put in a little extra work on the front end by hand processing versus using machinery, but it pays dividends on the back end. No drudgery of sanding, possibly a little scraping. Here where I had the tear out, I had some fairly massive tear out from the foreplane. That got cleaned up primarily with the joiner, but then further refined with the smoothing plane. So that's all end grain we see here in these knots. So I'll probably touch a scraper across it very quickly. Again, this is going to be the inside of a tool chest, so most people will never see that. But as it is, you can see there's a bit, or hopefully you can see in the light, there's a bit of a sheen to this, even on this poplar. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you found this information useful, and if you did, click that like button, subscribe, click the notification bell, and don't forget to enable notifications on your mobile device so you don't miss any of my future videos. If you have any outstanding questions on this topic, leave a comment and I'll try to address them in a future video. Have a wonderful day.